Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. From teens to senior citizens, women are overcoming obstacles and cultural customs around the world to make a difference, influence their communities, and lead others to live out their purpose. They're in remote villages and large cities. They may not have large followings on social media or speak on stages, but they are changing the world. Our next guest says this is an honest look at what it means to be a woman of influence in a world that often doesn't make leadership easy. It's about leading with grace in cultures that aren't always graceful. It's about reclaiming all your God-given physical and spiritual DNA and allowing it to do its work and triumph through you. Her new book takes us on a journey into the very real lives of very real women. Every one of them has fought fear. Each of them at times has questioned herself or worried she'd be found lacking in a world that loves to define us but what we do rather than who we are. These women battle self-loathing, mental illness, loneliness. They battle their pasts. They battle oppression and bias and scorn. There are days when all goes well and days when knees are bloodied from stumbling. And yet they still believe they're designed by God to make an impact and influence the world. Ronne Rock weaves themes of transformative hope and grace-filled leadership into everything she shares on page and stage. An award-winning marketing and communications executive in both the corporate and nonprofit sectors, she now shares her more than 30 years of experience in creative leadership with faith-based organizations. She also travels around the world to gather words and images that inspire others to action with Orphan Outreach, a global nonprofit dedicated to serving the orphaned and vulnerable. She's a writer, blogger, and speaker, sharing battle-tested wisdom about leadership, advocacy, marketing, and finding God in the most beautiful and painful of circumstances. You can find out more at ronnerock.com. That's R-O-N-N-E, rock.com. Joining us now to talk about her new book, One Woman Can Change the World, Reclaiming Your God-Designed Influence and the Impact Right Where You Are, is Ronne Rock. Ronne, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Ronne, this journey into womanhood is not a journey of choice. You're either born a woman or you're born a man. So there's just not, it's not a choice we have. Mm-hmm. We come into this world and the world receives us differently. And yes, how the world receives us, our reception alters our perception. And that's what shapes and forms many people's lives, is either trying to live up or live down to the expectations that have been put on them. Mm-hmm. Your journey is a journey into the fullness of womanhood. Yes. That even the least of these can be counted among the greatest of these. Mm-hmm. And those who make the difference in one life really do change the world, one life at a time.
Absolutely.
Take us on a journey back to you growing up, being named for Veronica Lake, mm-hmm, into a child of the same generation that I am of. What was life like for you growing up in that family? How are you defined? How did you find your definition? Was it a foundation of faith? Was it a foundation of the world? And what helped shape your journey to get you to the point where you could begin to see through this lens and truly edify women around the globe for the contribution they make to their communities, the same way you want to make a contribution to the larger kingdom community of God?
I tell you, I would love to be able to say that I was raised with a strong community of faith around me, and I did have my ancestors, my grandparents, great-grandparents. They loved Christ, and they talked a lot about grace. However, as we know, just because a family member loves the Lord does not mean necessarily that next generation is going to do the same. And so I grew up in a home that was really torn with conflict. And I talk about it a little bit in the book, but I don't go into a lot of detail because I want to get you to where we are in the book. But right. I grew up in an environment of a lot of hostility between my parents. My dad had been married 2 times and divorced 2 times before he met my mom. He was 12 years her senior. He had been to World War II. I would say that now he suffered from PTSD, but in those days, that was not something that was discussed. And so he came back to the States, and he was a consummate bootstrapper. He believed that you were a self-made success. And so he did everything he could to become successful at the cost of 2 marriages. And when he met my mom, he was already on a very dangerous road to alcoholism and prescription drug abuse. She saw him as the ticket to get out of a very, very small town and an opportunity for her life to be better, even though she didn't fully understand what that meant. So again, when I was born, I had parents that fought a lot. We attended church when I was extremely small until it just really got in the way on Sundays, and so stopped attending church. And I remember even as a small child asking my mom, if you hate each other so much, why do you stay together? And my mom would say, we're staying in this marriage for you, because you make your bed and you lay in it. And so I am not going to have you be a part of split families. So I remember as a small child wondering if I didn't exist, if maybe their lives would be happier. I think a lot of children in those type of situations feel the same way. But I had my mom on one side who taught me a lot about men. None of it was really good. She had a lot of choice words to say about men. I had a cousin who was very, very successful, very business minded, single, and very independent. So she taught me, like, took me out to learn how to drive a car at 13 because she wanted to make sure that I was going to be the best at driving a car. And I started working when I was 14, below the legal age to work, just because it was the right thing to do. So I was raised in this very bootstrapping, self-made, nobody is going to give you any breaks. You need to make it on your own. That was the environment I grew up in. Where my adult life landed was somewhere not to that degree. I grew up, I fell head over heels in love with Jesus Christ the day after my 21st birthday. I literally ran down the aisle at the church that I was visiting with a friend, because that love and that unmerited favor sounded so compelling to me, to know that I could be loved without merit, to know that I could be loved without a list of things to do, was so compelling. So I fell in love with Jesus. I was very successful in school. I was a high achiever in school, got scholarships to go to the university to get a journalism degree, did that, dropped out of college to get married. And after some thorny years, because even though I loved Jesus, there was still a lot that needed to be healed within me, right? As we know, it's a journey, not a one-stop shop. There is that journey for healing, and I had some healing that needed to happen. So I made some decisions regarding relationships that were not the wisest of decisions. I don't look back on those with regret, though, I will tell you, because I really do believe that God weaves our story, and He is a sovereign God who weaves our story into something that will glorify Him. I found myself a single mom, and I will tell you that it was probably on that single mom journey where I really began to dive into what it meant to fully embrace all that God had said about me in His Word and how He had designed. And that journey is a long journey, right? So I still had a lot of bootstrapper in me. I still thought that everything should be solved on a whiteboard, right? With You ask a few key questions and you come up with about 3 good steps. And if they alliterate, then you're even cooler, because I was a marketer. I got into marketing, and I was in the corporate side of marketing. I worked in television. I worked for a major airline. I worked for a global retailer. And then about 13 years ago, took the leap into the nonprofit ministry side full time, thinking that I was going to bring all of my wealth of marketing to that side. And God still had new stories to share with me. And it's those stories that you find in the book of the women that I met around the world that really taught me how incredibly beautiful it was and is to be a woman. Because that was the one thing that was still kind of stuck in here, is I had this view of womanhood as something that was a little pushed to the side, that we were an afterthought. And then when I would see the two sides, it was either we are an afterthought or we are designed for hearth and home, or there was the be a girl boss, crush the patriarchy. And I felt it's like neither one of those feels complete. Neither one of those feels like it should be the Father's heart. And so it's truly been in this past journey of about 12 or 13 years that the Lord has helped me fall in love with what it means to be a woman.
You start the book out talking about the trouble with women, which is
Yes.
interesting that in this very self-reflective mirror, in looking at yourself as being the average, normal, fitting into the programming of the a generation that was programmed a certain way. It was either programmed with the we're going to do everything we can for you to have a better life than we had, or we're going to hold you back and you're going to have to fit the stereotype. But it was a time of awakening and stretching the boundaries, redefining what womanhood was, and you were riding that wave on a surfboard all the way through that, through the crashes, through the successes, through all of that. So starting the book out with Reclaiming Your Design, the trouble with women, I can tell you this as someone who is not far from 70, I'd love to have the answer to the clues to understanding women.
I would love to have all the clues to understanding women too. But you know what? I'm getting there, I think. I will tell you that when I say that the real trouble with women is us, it is not to discount that, you know what, there is oppression in this world, real oppression in this world. There are systemic, there are systems and there are laws that tell women that they do not have the same rights as men. And many of the women that you meet in the book are living in those cultures and still thriving. They are still thriving because of their love for Christ, because of their focus on ministry, because they realize that love for Christ and that grace and mercy cannot be governed by law. It really can't. But what I find, especially in our culture, and I'm going to talk specifically to those of us in the U.S., because that's where I live, and I will say that our culture continues to pit women against each other, and we fight each other. And you look at culture as far as social media goes and things, and there is still that current that says that a woman must be, and then you lay out what that is. So it could be the fact that we are a little too old or a little too young, that we are not raised in the right neighborhood, that we don't have enough money, that we're not educated enough. We can lay all of the allegations against us that tell us that we are not equipped, that we are not adequate to be able to truly influence those around us to be able to truly step into the life of someone else. And so it is that where I see that yes, oppression exists, patriarchy exists, matriarchy exists, systemic issues exist, racism exists. You can go through the list of these are real issues. However, the issue that we fight a lot of times is wrapped up in who we are. And we say, you know what, had I done that when I was younger, if I was only younger, if I was only prettier, if my complexion was only different, if my skin shade was only different, we lay out all of the allegations that either cause us to condemn others or condemn ourselves. And it breaks the heart of Father God. Because if you look at Genesis 1, he said that he created man and woman, saw us, designed us in his image and likeness, looked at us and said, you are very good. And then set us on a course of leadership. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of times for women, I think we kind of start at Genesis 2, and we start at Genesis 2 with there was Eve, and she was an afterthought. And then she clearly didn't have her head on straight. And then the world went to hell in a handbasket. Thanks. And so we start with a view of women that says that for some reason we messed it all up. And
I'm going to stop you there for a minute, because the truth in the Hebrew text is really quite clear that this was the failing of Adam, not the failing of Eve. That actually the narrative in that discussion should have been Eve simply saying, no, God never spoke to me. Mm-hmm. If you have something to ask about what God said, go ask my husband. That's who he spoke to. But in this narrative, what happens is that Adam kind of gets a pass, but what he does is he actually blames God for the woman that he gave her. Then he blames the woman, and then he accepts responsibility. We've been operating in that mode for 5,780 years, of that mode of pointing the finger at other people and not being accountable for our own behaviors and looking at it with the right perspective. So what we've done is we have created societies, we've created cultures, we've created religious structure, we've created this objectification of a woman because her anatomy is different, and we've relegated her because of her abilities to be able to carry a child, to be able to be more spiritually sensitive, to having certain giftings where we were commanded to subdue the earth and to conquer, be provider, protector, bootstrapper. This is our role, that we took that and we said that's our only role. But that's not how God defined us. He said, I created man in our image, both male and female. So is that distinctly male and female? Is that a combined unit of male and female? It was, because he was talking about Adam before the separation of Eve from his body. So this declaration was made prior to Eve, that he was talking about the entity of man being both male and female. Not that we have a gender identity or gender confusion. It is just that there are the gifts of compassion. There's the gifts of mercy. There are gifts of love. Listen, I'm so tender with my granddaughter. I'm so tender with my daughter. I've always been a tender dad because I had a grandfather who was a Prussian general. I know that rigid, hard, harsh life. But I'm the nurturing dad. I'm the loving dad. I'm the more, mothers give me their babies and say, look, the baby doesn't cry when they're in your arms. I can't get them to stop crying. And we're supposed to tap into that. And so these stereotypical debating over which life matters, debating over whether or not one gender is superior to is foolishness. It's a fool's journey. It's a fool's argument, and it does nothing to glorify and edify the kingdom. It does nothing but to tear down and create more division in a world that needs to be reconciled to each other and reconciled to God. And so I commend you for saying that the trouble is that women have allowed and bought into, but have been forced to buy into, but you don't have to be. In a corporate sense, global sense, you may not be able to break out of that mold and change all of society. But in the individual contribution sense, which is the way that Nineveh was won, was because of one person. The way that Esther was one person that changed the course of history. Joseph changed the course of history. One person has the power to change the course of humanity. So we can't hide behind this corporate, global, systemic problem and just say, well, I'm victimized by it, when, listen, the people in the Bible weren't victimized by their circumstances. No. They rose above them. Rahab was the first Corrie ten Boom. We've been calling her a harlot for thousands of years. We need to stop calling her a harlot and start talking about her on saying that Corrie ten Boom patterned her life after Rahab. Right? That if you want your Boaz, you better have a former prostitute for a mother-in-law.
So true. I think about the Samaritan woman.
Yes.
And I will, growing up when I did attend church and I would go to church with friends, the Samaritan woman I was taught was like, oh, you would not want to hang with her. She was horrible. She was so bad other women didn't want to hang with her because she had been married and divorced 5 times. And then you start studying, though, you start looking at cultural, which I think, if I could tell anything to women, and I say this in the prologue, is like, I want this to be the beginning of a conversation with you and the Lord, and to really ask, what if I thought about women? What have I thought about myself? But I think about the Samaritan woman. You look culturally and like, oh, she couldn't file for divorce. This was not about, this was a woman, you know what? If I had been married and 5 men had left me, I don't know if I'd want to be remarried either. But she seemed to have enough respect in a community that she could go and preach, and folks could listen to the point that Jesus would want to stay 2 more days because of what was happening in her community. And it wasn't that, he spoke the truth to her. It transformed her, and then she went and spoke truth to others. But again, I had always been raised to believe that she was just a vile human being.
So what you're telling me is that the first New Testament revival that took place in the Messiahship of Jesus, the first revival that saved a nation comparable to Jonah and Nineveh, was a woman speaking, going into a community and having a voice that was listened to, and all came out to see him and believed in him. That the first revival was at the voice of a woman. Are you serious? That's in the Bible?
That's in the Bible.
My goodness. So a woman's not supposed to speak. A woman's not supposed to have a voice, but yet the very first documented revival in the Messiahship of Jesus, when people who were half-breeds, they were half-Jewish, were virtually untouchable, that he was in a place he should not have been, in a conversation with somebody he should not have been in a conversation, that would have been inappropriate for him to be hanging out at a place where women meet as a single man, to have an encounter and to speak to her, which was not customary, and to reveal to her without condemnation, and for her to take that as encouragement to say that she had met the prophet and to come out and see the prophet, sounds to me like her boldness, her identity was now being reshaped by Messiah. So if that happened 2,000 years ago, what has changed that women should not have their identity in Messiah and have the boldness to speak out on behalf to bring change to a nation, the same way you document in your book, one woman can change the world. One woman, the woman at the well, changed the world. It's the same pattern as to where Abraham sent Eleazar to find a wife for his son Isaac. It's the same place that Jacob found a wife at the well. This was the place where life began, the woman at the well. This is where who helped water the sheep? Who helped? It was Moses. Who helped? Go all the way down the line, and you'll see that life happened at the well, and that's where you met women. Right? And that's where all of these generations came about to lead us to Messiah and these stories to build upon. We're talking with Ronne Rock, author of the new book, One Woman Can Change the World, filled with stories of everyday women displaying heroic faith in difficult situations. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to take a visit with some of these women who have found a way to change their communities, and by changing their communities, have made a kingdom impact. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zev Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Sean Tabbitt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com, or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Ronne Rock, author of One Woman Can Change the World. You can find more about her at ronnerock.com. Ronne, welcome back to this segment of the program.
Thank you.
Ronne, you take us on the journey, and right before break, I mentioned and I made a statement, and the statement is that every man wants his Proverbs 31 woman, but he doesn't want to be a Proverbs 31 man. So your comment is that most people should look at this as a checklist. Most men look at a checklist of attributes they want in a woman, but it's actually a model for leadership of how to develop that in the woman in your life and how to shepherd a woman's heart. And I will tell you this, that I came to the Lord in the synagogue, Messianic synagogue. I came out of the traditional synagogue at age 44, 3 weeks before my 44th birthday, I accepted the Lord 25 years ago. And over the course of time, I began to realize that I thought preaching the gospel was the highest calling. And so I pursued and left the corporate world and pursued postgraduate work and pursued ordination and pursued starting a congregation. But I realized after studying the scriptures that the highest calling was shepherding a woman's heart. This was the highest calling of man in the garden. This was something that was birthed in the garden. Preaching the gospel wasn't birthed in the garden. Telling people about the Lord wasn't birthed in the garden. Shepherding a woman's heart was birthed in the garden. And of course, the high calling of preaching the gospel, we're all called to be. All of us are called into a ministry of reconciliation. All of us are called to preach the gospel. It's not just this gift of preaching in a pulpit kind of thing. We're all supposed to be ambassadors for God. 2 Corinthians 5:17 through 6:10. If you're a Messiah, you are an ambassador. You are a minister of reconciliation. So I began to realize that this shepherding of a woman's heart was what God was entrusting us with, the literal open heart surgery, taking the heart of a woman, placing it in a man's hands and saying, what will you do with it? Are you going to put it on a shelf? Are you going to drop it on the ground? Are you going to stomp on it? What are you going to do with it? Because how you treat her is how you treat your daughters, how your daughters are going to be drawn to husbands, how their husbands are going to treat them. And these are generational things that you are setting patterns for, and that is building my kingdom. And unless you see it from the beginning as how you're going to influence and build my kingdom through these relationships, that you are to become one with your wife. She's no longer separate from you. You two are one. That is, one is unified. It's not a matter as one is equal to the other. They are one. They are a unit. They are singular, which is the most powerful number in the Bible. And we've lost all sense of that. And we have two entities. And we talk about this cord of three strands as if it were separate strands that, although they're bound together, you unravel them until you want to be strong, then you wrap them together. Then you unravel them and you live separately. But then when you come together because there's a problem, then you wrap them together. No, it starts out as a cord of three strands, is not easily broken, and it stays that way. You may have to duct tape it and repair it along the way, but nevertheless, it never is supposed to become undone once it's been done. You don't unbraid the rope and make it into string. You leave it in the form of a rope. That's where its power is. And so this unraveling that we keep doing, where we say we're coming together but then we're coming apart, is really quite problematic. So we're having a little bit of difficulty with Ronnie's signal right now. But as we begin to explore some of these stories in the book, I've asked Ronnie to, there you are, you're back. Okay. As we look
Yes, I'm back. All of a sudden, I was like, wait, you first.
Yeah, your Wi-Fi froze up just a little bit. So in your journey, and this is a part of your journey, as you traveled around doing the marketing that you were doing, working with the organization of Orphan Outreach, you had the opportunity to travel to other nations, to experience other cultures, to look at societal standards, but yet you met some really quite incredible people along the way. And I equate these journeys to the gold miners shows that are on TV. If you've ever seen one of them, they mine these incredible mountains of dirt, move millions of tons of dirt, but never talk about the dirt. All they talk about are the nuggets. All they talk about is the weight, the gold at the end. And so as you recount these stories, you certainly set it up, but what you focus on is the gold, not on the dirt, not on the insurmountable, but what they've done. And so it's kind of like at the end of the day, you tap right here to check the bag of nuggets, just to make sure. You don't go out and check the pile of dirt. You harvest the nuggets, and that's what you've done in here. So some of the nugget stories that you have that really had great, and they all have meaning to you, and I encourage everyone to read each one of these accounts. But each one of them has a different message and was included for a different reason. Why don't you let us know why you included certain women in the stories that you did, and then some of the most profound stories, some of the most humorous stories, some of the most challenging stories for you, both to come to grips with your Western view, which would be offensive to the Western view, but when you have to be culturally sensitive to knowing that, and I tell people this because I take people to the Middle East every year and have for the last 17 years, you're not in Kansas anymore. Okay? You are going into a different culture. People ask me questions all the time about people in Israel, and I say, I'm sorry, but I don't share personal information. The relationship's too strong, the bond is too strong for me to share that kind of, and they go, well, we don't understand that. And I say, then you don't understand a Middle Eastern culture. You don't understand the privacy of our people and the importance of that intelligence, just not thrown around like they do in America, where people talk about everything. Cultures are different. And so you had to become culturally aware to customs and to behaviors. So take us on a journey with some of these women and what it was that you learned from them.
Sure. I'll start at the beginning. In the introduction, I talk about soon after I left the corporate world and still in this mindset that every problem could be solved with a great 3-step solution. I went with the team to Guatemala, and we went to a children's home that nobody else had visited. Some folks had gone, I think at some point they had made a donation. They had put a nice plaque on the wall and had never shown back up. But I was asked to go and visit this children's home to figure out what their needs were, because they had problems. And being a person from the West and coming in to save the day and be a problem solver, I went in, and it was honestly, it was the most challenging, because I went in expecting that there were problems because they were poor, they were in a developing country, and we were coming from the West to save the day. And within 24 hours, I was laid waste when I realized that these women had a faith that I had no idea how to have. They had a confidence in the Lord's provision that I didn't even know, because my provision and my confidence, even though I said I love the Lord, my confidence was still placed in capitalism in my country. There was so much security that was not resting in his provision, but in provision that I just felt was my right as a citizen. And so that was one of the most challenging. I remember laying in bed. We took so many things that we thought that they needed without ever asking them what their true needs were. And that first night, I remember laying in bed, crying and angry, because it frustrated me. It's like, God, how can they be so calm? How can they be so peaceful right now when they don't have enough food in their kitchen? Lord, we can build a plan. We can fix this problem. And I remember just having to learn to lay it down and going back and humbling myself, which is a huge thing. And I'm still learning. There are days that humility is there, and there are other days that my ego just likes to climb. But humbling myself and listening to them, which I think is the first issue of stepping into somebody else's world, right? It's taking time to listen to them, both what their needs are, felt needs, understanding what culture says about them, understanding the role that they play. So that was probably the most challenging one for me, was honestly because I wanted to fix it. And I didn't want to come alongside them and amplify them and elevate them, as it says in Romans 12. We're supposed to affirm others, and I didn't. I was just ready to come and fix the problem. So Lourdes and Teresa taught me, and continue to teach me. I've known them now for more than a decade, and they continue to teach me about what the simplicity of faith and the simplicity of trust in the Lord, and it's long road trust. And neither one of those women, one was a doctor and one was a teacher, and they both followed their dad to Guatemala from Mexico. They gave up their careers to serve their family, which, of course, in our culture, we'd go, what? What do you mean? You didn't have a plan in place? You didn't have a 5-year plan? They're like, no, we're trusting. So one of probably the one that's the most tender to me would be Miss Mary. And she was actually the one that challenged me to write this book. She was the one that said, so where's your book, love? And I go, what do you mean? Hell will freeze over before I ever write a book, Miss Mary. And she said, you got to tell our story. And I didn't even understand what that meant. She at the time was a director at a school for the deaf in Jamaica. And I love her story. She said, I walked in, I had been recruited by them to come and to teach and to work at that school. And I went, I said, fine, I'll go just to prove to you that I am not your person. And 22 years later, she finally retired. And I love what Miss Mary says, because it's something I think that we run into in the U.S. a lot, is we believe that the only way to make a difference is it needs to be big, and we have to have a platform, and we have to have a powerful voice, and that a small voice or a whispered prayer really doesn't impact. And Miss Mary will tell you, God does not need you to be big for him. He simply needs you to obey what he wants. And then he will lift the stage that he wants you to stand on, and he will bring the folks who need to hear. But he does not need you to be big. He just wants you to walk, no different than in Eden. What he wanted was us to join hands with him and walk in the cool of the afternoon and talk about the day. And here it is, 2020, and his heart's desire is still the same, is to walk with us and for us to trust him that as our Father, he actually does have our best interests at heart. And he has the best interest of those around us at heart too. And he is inviting us, as scripture says, he's laid out the ministry. He's inviting us to be participants in that. And we can trust him because he views us as poetry. One of the translations in Ephesians is like, we are heaven's poetry. That is how when he looks at us, he is not mildly annoyed with us all the time. So, and then Ina, who is from Honduras, who she had a really beautiful life, married, had kids. She lived in a very lovely home in this particular village in Honduras. But her life came undone. Marriage came undone. Kids are grown. She finds herself alone. And the only thing that she really wants to do is to teach, because she had homeschooled her kids. She wasn't trying to impact anything. She just missed something that brought her joy. And so she looked around her own neighborhood, looking for anybody that might need a tutor. And she found a community on the other side of town called La Invasion, and it was a squatter community. And these folks would come desperate, hoping that one day they might own a parcel of land. And they would work long hours in land that didn't belong to them, with no electricity and no running water. And the kids of those families were struggling in school. And she went to her church and said, I found an opportunity that we could go help some kids. And her church said, it's not in our neighborhood. And she realized, well, I could wait for leaders to tell me what to do. I could wait for somebody else to do it and then follow, or I could follow that nudge that is in my heart. And I'm going to take the step. And she found another woman that had the same heart, and they started an after-school program that elevated the kids in a community and helped the parents along the way to teach their kids. But she says you just dip your toe in the water, that you don't wait until you have that 5-year plan, like I thought that I needed to have in Guatemala. Like, we'll build a 5-year plan. She's like, you just dip your toe in the water. God's just asking you to dip your toe in the water and see if it parts a little bit in front of you. He's not asking you to have every decision laid out. He's not asking you to have it all mapped out. He is just saying, if there is a world in front of you and it has need, dip your toe in the water. And then dip it again. And watch what God does. Because he's faithful and he's trustworthy. He is the author and he is the finisher. And he says that what he started in us, he will complete. And so we need to trust him. That when we take out those steps of faith, that he's going to meet us there. And he'll let us know.
You have a chapter called God of the Ampersand.
Yes.
And it starts out, yes, God is the God of the ampersand. He is the God of give me your child, and I will shape you for a nation. He's the God of give me your army, and I will shape you for victory. He is the God of give me your portion, and I will make you whole. So it's this covenant relationship with God, this partnering with God, and what you've described is the message both of Revelation chapter 2, where God says, I've seen your great works, but this I hold against you, that look at the heights from which you've fallen, you've forsaken your first love, the Holy Spirit. So God's saying, I don't want you to do more for me, I want you to do more with me. The stories that you chronicle in the book are stories about people doing things with God, not people doing things for God. How is that made so clear? How are you able to focus in on that aspect? Because that's a missing component. Most of them is, how do I become more pleasing to God? How do I become more holy? How do I drive towards the prophetic gifts? How do I develop more of my gifting? How can I be of more service to the kingdom? And it's all about the doing as opposed to the relating. And being the hands and feet of God means that I have to have him at the control center. I can't be the one in control. He's got to be. It's like the joysticks on a robot. Let God be the controls. I'll go where he sends me. I'll do what he tells me. That requires a faith, a trust, and a surety that the will of God will never lead you where the grace of God cannot keep you. How did you see that manifest in these women?
You know, it just, honestly, it was just the way they lived. It was the approach, it was the demeanor in which they even spoke about their relationship with the Lord. And it was watching them walk it out every day, not just them spouting a few scripture or anything. It was literally watching them walk out both incredible beauty and in other instances just incredible heartache, and listening to them just simply say, oh, it's all about the Lord. Auntie, who is in the book, is in an area of India where less than 1% of the population is Christian. It is against the law for her to go out and evangelize. And if you were to ask her and you would say, that's not fair, and she would go, oh, that's fine. I live Christ. I live Christ. And when I talk to people, I live Christ. And they see him in me because my relationship, I love him and I live him out in my life. And then when people ask, what is it about you, Auntie, that makes you different? Then I'm able to share. But I don't have to stand on a street corner with a Bible to tell somebody about a distant God, because they will see him in my life. And when you ask her about anything, you're like, Auntie, what is the best way to raise children? She'll say, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's so matter of fact. It is so simple. I asked her, I saw her last year, and actually am supposed to be on a plane today to go see her again. and because of COVID cannot go see her. But I was going to deliver her book to her. But I asked her last year, I said, what wisdom would you give women who want to make an impact in their world? And her first statement was, she's like, love Jesus. Love Jesus. Just love Jesus with all your heart. And then don't try to become something that you're not. If you are married, love your family well. If you are single, love your community well. And she is single, which is another thing. About half the women in my book are single. And so you look at Proverbs 31, going back to that, and if it is simply a check mark list for a woman of what a perfect woman is supposed to be, then a lot of women feel like failures from the get-go if they're not married, because they feel like, well, unless I'm married or unless I have kids, then somehow I am not adequate to be able to serve well, to be able to lead well. And but again, about half the women in the book are single. Some by choice, they feel like that's what the Lord has called them. Some just, that is life, that they never found the right person. Some are widowed, but none of them view themselves as incomplete, because they see, as Auntie says, God is my husband. He's my husband.
Ronne, as we come to the last couple of minutes of the program, what message do you have for women who have been stuck in a mold, stuck in self-limiting thought patterns that you want to encourage them, both through the pages of this book and through the message that you carry in your website?
I would tell you that you are God's delight, first and foremost. That He designed you with great purpose. He didn't design you with a list of things for you to do. He designed you because He adored you. And so the way you are shaped, the way your eyes, a woman's eyes can see, her peripheral vision, the way you hear, the way your nerves connect, all of the things about you are His delight and His hope. You are God-breathed, God-designed, and all He wants of you is to hold His hand and trust Him, and to be unafraid to step into the world around you. You don't have to change the global world, but there's an opportunity for you in your home, in your neighborhood, with a friend maybe that you haven't met yet. Your story and your life will be impactful in their life, because that is His design. And just realize that He loves you. He truly loves you.
God says, do not despise the day of humble beginnings. And every one of these stories begins with a humble beginning. And there's a theme through it of the humility of true servants of God that are not looking to edify, glorify, and raise up themselves, but to lift up the name of Jesus and to make a difference so that one woman can change the world and reclaim your God-designed influence and impact right where you are. Grow where God planted you. And you can do amazing things if you'll grab a hold of the message of encouragement and be a life changer. Be an impact in one person's life. If right now our audience would focus in on what God is calling them to do and just do it. Don't go seek permission. Don't seek questions. Don't come with preconceived answers. If God says to you, go down and deliver a meal, go deliver the meal.
Do it. Yeah.
He'll deliver the rest of the message to you when you do your part. And that's the message of one woman can change the world. You do your part, and God will do His. Ronne Rock, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you so much. I
God
appreciate
bless.
it.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.